Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be investigating a number of strange phenomena. Cryptids, dogmen, black dogs, all these strange creatures. So I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. In 2013, I was homeless and living in the local women's shelter. The exclusive director of the place is a man called Dan. He was shady as hell, with the creepiest, sleaziest aura around him, and a long history of abusive behavior towards the shelter's clients. But that's an entirely different story. Most nights Dan left the shelter by 5 p.m, and he was virtually never to be found on the grounds past 7. But one October night, he was still kicking around at 9. A few of the other ladies and I were sitting outside just chatting when we saw him pull his car out of the back driveway and take off down the street, like his ass was on fire. His back tires spun out in the gravel before getting purchase, and that's how fast he accelerated. And just as his car disappeared, I saw an absolutely enormous black dog or wolf-like creature come leaping through the brick wall where his office was. It took 3 long strides across the front yard, leapt towards the road Dan had taken off down, and vanished into smoke. Everyone was quiet for a moment until I asked if anyone else had just seen that. One of the ladies said, "Yep," and we hurried around to get back inside. I'd never felt so deeply and viscerally unnerved than I did that night. I draped so many blankets over my bunk that it was like a little cave, just trying to feel secure enough to sleep. Fast forward to December, we had a new lady in our room and was staying up past lights out to work on some small Christmas gifts, and while we were working, we were quietly telling ghost stories. I happened to mention what happened in October, and once I'd finished, 2 things happened all at once. The temperature in the room plunged. It was a little chilly back there because Dan was too cheap to turn up the heat, or even turn it on sometimes. But this was cold, like someone had opened the window, and the baby in the room next door, who'd been dead asleep, let out the most blood-curdling shriek I'd ever heard from her, like someone was hurting her, and started screaming and crying so loud she woke up everyone in the women's shelter. To this day, I don't know what exactly I saw, but I've been left with the distinct feeling that it was evil and attached to Dan in some way or another. And it was always a joke that he'd sold his soul to the devil to be as untouchable as he was. I am an atheist, but I'm open to the ideas of ghosts. However, I can't explain what happened. Summer of 2017, I'm a 19-year-old male working in Dubrovnik, Croatia as a booker for a tourist company and a bartender/animator for the same company's pub crawl boat party. My employer was paying me and my 3 roommates accommodation, but this cheap guy placed us in a village called Uskople, which was 21.3 kilometers away from Dubrovnik. This village had 6 houses, not including our own, and less than 15 people living there. The biggest issue was that no bus passed there since it was atop a hill, so you needed to hike around downhill to this other village where the bus stop was built. The hike down to the village was 45 minutes, half hour on the road and 15 minutes in the village, and the bus ride to Dubrovnik was another 45 minutes. One night I was working alone and was coming back about 2 a.m. from the boat party, making my way back from the bus stop to our house. I stepped onto the road on the left of the village with the bus stop and turned on my phone flashlight to light the road since there were no streetlights. This was vehicles only, no pedestrian path, and I turned on the flashlight since this area was known for venomous snakes, and I wasn't willing to deal with that. I'm halfway there when all of a sudden I heard a howling behind me, a wolf-like howl. First, there are no wolves in this part of Croatia, and secondly, my father is a vet, and we've had a lot of dogs, mostly German shepherds, so I know what a big dog sounds like. And this dog's voice was deep. I slowly turn around and find this massive dog staring at me, roughly 20 meters away, growling, barking and howling, but not moving a muscle. I followed his example and stood there for half a minute, just analyzing the dog. I had never seen this breed of dog. It must have been twice the size of a German shepherd, let's say as large as a Great Dane, but its head was definitely more similar to a Doberman or Belgian shepherd. Also, it was completely black. There was something completely off about this dog. I'm not gonna say it had an evil aura, since I don't believe in that sort of thing, but I simply had the feeling that this was something of a demonic dog, or something like that. I can't explain it, but for some reason, I felt like the least of my worries should be this dog biting me. Take note, at this point we were standing in the middle of a road, in the middle of the night. There aren't a lot of cars that pass here at this hour, but I wanted to get off the road either way. After staring each other down for about a minute, I slowly, without turning, make my way to the house. After I walked about 100 meters, the dog stopped the growling, turned away and left. I picked up the pace, and was just only a few minutes away from home when I heard a growl. This time it was meters away from me. I turned around and the dog was less than 3 meters away. If I had made a single step, I could have reached out and petted him. Once again, this dog was growling, but not attacking me. It did the regular attack-mode posture with its tail up, legs widened, ears up and teeth showing. We stared at each other for another minute. The dog didn't move a muscle and neither did I. The beast was as large as me, at least, and weighing at least 60 kilograms, and was definitely as large as a Great Dane. Once again I slowly start making my way home backwards, and the dog doesn't let up. But it doesn't follow me. I made my way home, and the barking and howling stopped as I closed the door behind me. I tell my roommates about it, and they say they'd never heard anything, even though the dog was relentlessly barking and howling just 200 meters away from the house while they were awake with no TV nor radio on in the room. I asked the neighbors about the dog. They said the same thing, and added that no one in the village owns a dog. My roommates and I agreed that we should never let anyone go home alone at night because of this scenario. We went on to investigating the surrounding area and never found anything. The reason this baffles me so much is because the temperature there can reach over 40 Celsius, and that's in the shade. There's no natural drinkable water source, and there are no animals there except for snakes, small lizards, birds, and insects. The dog, even if it were able to stand the heat, could not feed, and that large of a dog must need a lot of food, nor could it find water. There was no way that dog could survive in the wild, and there wasn't anyone nearby or in the next village who owned a large dog. The neighbor was kind enough to ask around, you see. The dog seemed to have come from nowhere, and we never have heard from it again, which is probably for the best. About 2 years ago, my best friend and I were driving home from late-night classes. We live in a rural area and take these roads daily. We've had a few strange encounters on these roads, but this one stuck with me. It was pretty dark, and we were going about 40 miles an hour. I never drive faster than that on these roads because of deer and other wildlife. The road has a few houses, so it wasn't completely wooded. I'm driving alone and see some eyes and a dark figure that resembled a dog. I stop the car to let it cross the road. It runs across the road and at the edge of the bank and stands on its hind legs and runs like a human. My friend and I are scared because of how creepy this was. We tried to register what we saw and decided that it wasn't possibly a dog. It may have been something else. It was too small and skinny to be a bear. All I can conclude is that I saw a skinny canine creature running across the road, then stand on its hind legs and run into the wood. It was a quiet and damp night in Arcata, California. In this small town, not much happened. Low crime rates, everyone knew everyone. If there was a roaring party meant to happen, every team in town knew. And if someone wasn't from there, we could smell it. It was oddly dark tonight, completely devoid of light. My friends and I decided to play on our personal playground this morning, and we've been out here ever since. It looks and feels to be close to midnight. I've always been good at telling time just by looking at the moon. Tonight was a full moon, actually, my favorite of the bunch. "Marie, come on, we're going to play hide and seek," my best friend yelled from across the field. I didn't even notice that I had been staring at the moon for quite some time now. Well, we had a hill that connected the playground and the woods, and if you went into the woods, you'd soon find yourself in your neighbor's backyard, so the hill created a wall between us and the neighbors. As kids, we made a sort of dare to see who had the guts to jump the wall and into the playground. I, of course, always won. Well, me and Vanessa. Vanessa is my best friend. We're closer than Tom and Jerry, honestly. "Coming," I respond to Vanessa. Then our friend Jackson, who's only about a year younger than us, which makes him 8. I take one last glance at the hill, which is the way to climb the wall, but my attention is immediately drawn to something much more peculiar. I see someone's feet climbing the hill, but I can't see their face due to a branch that drapes over the hill. At first, I think nothing of it. People always climbed the hill as a shortcut to get to our neighbors on the other side, but for some reason this wall was different. I couldn't take my eyes off this strange figure. By this time, Vanessa and Jackson noticed my staring and came over to see what I was so intrigued with. Within a blink of an eye, the human feet that were once visible are now paws. Almost on instinct, I push Vanessa and Jackson behind me slowly, backing away towards the entrance to the house. "Guys, run!" We all start sprinting towards the door. I struggle for my keys, but they drop to the ground, and I hear a gasp come from Nessa, and I look up to find a creature staring right at us. I secretly slip the keys to Vanessa while I stand in front of them in a protective stance. He's big. His dew-coated fur is like coal. Drew escaped through his mangy-sharp teeth, disappearing into the prickly grass. His eyes, well, they were gazing right at me. It felt like he was taking a piece of my soul, and they were blood red. But to my own surprise, I wasn't afraid. I felt drawn to him, paralyzed almost, like I never wanted to leave the spot I stood in, but my protection for my safety of my friends got the better of me. "You want them? You're gonna have to go through me," I said confidently. He saw the challenge in my eyes. I half expected him to lunge at us, but he never did. He stood there, his crimson orbs never leaving my brown ones. He was drawn to me. I could see it. I could taste it. I felt a tug on my Backstreet Boys shirt, and before I knew it, I was standing facing Vanessa and Jackson in my own home. They looked terrified, to say the least. Everything was in complete silence now. We were safe, but in my mind I was still out there gazing into those eyes. I wanted to see them again, and I turned to look in the window, but it was gone. There was a sting in my heart, a feeling of disappointment and rejection. My friends and I ran upstairs to calm ourselves down. We all got permission from our mums in order for them to sleep over until the morning. The next day, my mum walked Nessa and Jax to their house, and we never spoke of that night again. 10 years later, and I still fall asleep in the cold of night dreaming about those crimson eyes. I've had more than one and my fair share of paranormal experiences, and came face to face with multiple weird things since then. I'm now 20 and did some deep research as to what I saw. The only thing that describes my experience to a T is the hellhound. My dad had a sister who I never met. She passed away before I was born. It's a very touchy subject, as you can imagine, within the family. But one time my grandma was getting drunk and brought up this story on her own. I asked my father about it after, and he begrudgingly nodded his head and said that we think it's true, but to not speak of it. The tale goes like this. Apparently, many years ago, my father and his sister were out on the land as they lived on a ranch. They were doing their duties, and his sister chose to stay out a little longer to finish off some work she was doing. She must have been around 17 at the time. My father, a bit younger, went in because he was hungry, and she never returned. After about 2 hours, my dad was thinking it was weird that she hadn't come in yet, so he went out looking for her, and when he found her, she was crying by a tree. The sun had almost set, and it was dark, and he was asking her what was going on. She explained that just as she was finishing trimming some bushes, did she look over to come into the house and put the shears away, when she saw this huge black dog with red eyes. She said the dog easily came up to her chest, and that upon seeing it, she froze in fear. The dog glared at her without a sound for a few more seconds, and just like that, evaporated into a smoky mist. His sister couldn't take it, and she freaked out, ran and hid behind a tree, not knowing what to do and too scared to go home, as that would mean passing where it had disappeared. My dad told her not to worry, that it was probably her imagination, but deep down, he didn't think she could imagine something so vivid that would terrify her so much. He brought her in, and they tried to forget about it. But apparently his sister liked to share, and told my grandmother and my grandfather what she'd seen. My grandfather, being a very stern man, said that it was nonsense, that she obviously imagined it, and to put it at the back of her mind and not give it any more thought. My grandmother, however, was a bit more compassionate, and although she had a hard time believing her that some strange dog appeared out of the mist and then vanished again, she did her best to make her feel better. Not 3 days passed, and again my dad's sister was out on the land doing some yard work. My dad was right next to her. They were chatting and having a good time, when all of a sudden she seizes up. My dad looks at her with a start, and in the distance he sees the very same black dog. She is frozen in fear, and as the dog disappears, she lets out a horrific yell, and then her face contorts in agony. My dad doesn't really know how to describe it, but her eyes nearly rolled to the back of her head and she collapsed. They rushed her to hospital, and they found out that apparently she had an unknown aneurysm in her head, and it had burst, killing her. They don't know if the sight of the black dog was enough to cause it to burst from the stress, or perhaps it was an omen of her life coming to an end. As you can imagine, it took a very heavy toll on the family. My grandfather started drinking again, ended up going to rehab, and never ended up leaving, as he took his own life from the grief. My grandmother is still about, and doesn't often talk about her daughter, but I know she still hurts from it. My father has never let us have a dog, for obvious reasons. My mum has had many strange and paranormal encounters in her life, including meeting her own doppelganger as a child. She had many stories to tell me, and I've grown up hearing about them. The flying cups in her bedroom, the vacuum cleaner running by itself when she was a little girl. However, there's one that still baffles me to this day, and I want to know if anyone else has ever seen this creature or knows anything about it. Years ago, before I was born, my mum had been staying at her best friend's house for a while. Her best friend was married, so her husband was also there, but he and my mum barely interacted with each other when she was there. He always kept to himself and still does today, as they're still friends. As my mum put it, she was parked in her friend's driveway waiting for her friend to come out so that they could leave. My mum was alone in the car, fiddling around with some buttons and such, and she glanced in her rearview mirror. What she saw horrified her. In the rearview mirror, she saw a large black dog walking on its hind legs. Now, I'm a very skeptical person of everything, so I asked my mum if it was just a random big old dog standing on its back legs and using the car for support. She insists that no, it was walking like a human did. It did not touch her car, it walked along the sidewalk like a human would. It did not once get on all fours, and that it walked on two legs. She swears this, and I can see by the genuine terror in her eyes that she's telling the truth. I asked if she saw the legs. She said as soon as she looked behind her, it had vanished into thin air, gone like a ghost. When she looked around, there wasn't a single dog or person in sight. That's not the scariest part, for me at least. My mum visited her best friend again, not just the house, she hates the house now, a few years ago, and the subject of spirits came up. My mum told her exactly what she told me about the dog or whatever it was walking behind the car in her driveway, because she never told anyone. Her best friend looked at her pale in the face and said, "My husband told me he saw that too. It walked on two legs." Two people saw the exact same creature in the same spot at different times. I've heard legends of dogs and how you can see it so many times as a signal of fate or fortune. But what was that? Have any of you ever seen anything like it? I'm terrified because I passed my driving test recently, and if I see this thing, or anything remotely unnatural in my rearview mirror, I think I'll have a heart attack. 15 years ago, I lived in a town in Indiana. Where we lived was in the country a few miles away from town. There were a few weird things that happened, so first off I woke up at 3 a.m. and had a strong urge to go to my window when I opened the blinds and saw yellow eyes, and it was as if it were piercing through my soul. I felt instant hopelessness and fear, then turned around and went back to bed. I'm 100% sure I wasn't dreaming when the morning came, and I went to the area I saw the eyes and didn't see any footprints. The following night, I was standing on my porch and suddenly smelt rotting flesh, the worst thing I've ever smelt, and proceeded to hear crunching leaves. To my left, I see a very large black dog walking towards my home. I screamed and ran inside that night, and I heard scratching on the side panels of our home. The following day, I found a large patch of fur, probably 4x4, in the same area where I had seen the large dog, but the fur was white with grey instead of black. I called this thing a dog, but it was dark. I looked at this thing for long enough to determine it wasn't a deer and freaked out and ran. I knew it was tall and on all fours. We lived at that house for another year, and there were still some mornings I would smell the rotting flesh. There have also been weird instances where I've spoken about this and phones will glitch out or the phone line will cut. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it was spooky. I didn't even know what I saw until a few months ago. I was drinking with friends, and one of them tells me a story, and he starts going on about skinwalkers. So, who knows? I'll preface this by saying that I have spent a lot of time with Native Americans, and their culture/history is really important to me. My dad grew up on the border of a reservation in Alaska and was adopted by a family that was Inuit, and I spent a good amount of time with a friend who is Lakota. At the time of this incident, a friend and I were leaving Standing Rock after being there for 6 weeks to drive home to Texas. We, for some reason, decided to go and see Mount Rushmore on our way back, and after being at Standing Rock for so very long, we had a sour taste in our mouths seeing American presidents' faces carved into the mountains that were straight up stolen from natives. So my friend decided that we should go to Wounded Knee. It was only a few hours out of the way home, and it seemed important that we go. Side note, it was about 11 p.m. at this point, but screw it, I was planning on driving straight to Texas, and we should go to pay our respects, especially after Rushmore. Fast forward, GPS takes us straight to the main part of the gravestones and monuments, plus a bunch of descriptive signs. I've never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that, but as we parked, I was seized with a terrible fear. I couldn't move, refused to get out of the car, struggling not to have a panic attack and get out of there, that kind of fear. My friend gets out of the car and goes to read the memorials, and I sit in the car literally paralyzed with fear and terror. I look out the window and see 2 giant black dogs with red eyes that look directly at me. All I could feel was this oppressive feeling that was almost a thought that we didn't belong there. And the word leave. We maintained eye contact as I literally started to shake and feel the most horrible feeling and sense of dread I have ever felt. Also, for the record, I'm a really tough lady, so it takes much more to even ruffle me. I lay on the horn, and once again my friend returns to the car, and I tell her that we need to leave now. I don't tell her what's going on. I just type Texas into GPS with shaking hands and start to drive away. Following the instructions, I leave, taking a bunch of turns and roads I didn't remember from the way in. And after around 5 minutes, we end up right back at the exact same place of Wounded Knee that we were at. Right then, feeling legitimate and actual terror, and trying not to lose my mind, I tell my friend what's going on. She happens to be a hippie who believes in stuff like spirits and crystals, and she took me seriously, pulls her phone out, and her GPS did the same thing. All I feel is dread. I cannot get those eyes out of my head, and I decided to trust my hound dog's sense at that point and just drove as far away as I could. My friend insisted we threw off all the jewelry we were wearing, and I drove in clammy terror for at least an hour before I felt okay to even speak. I still don't know exactly what happened, and it still unnerves me. I got goosebumps just remembering this. As a kid, I saw a fair share of paranormal activity, but this is one that has left me puzzled. As a child, me and my siblings all shared one room, 2 bunk beds for them and a kid's bed for me, pushed right under the window of our room. I vividly remember waking up one night, probably 5 or 6 years old, to a pitch-black room. As I laid in bed terrified of the dark, I got an overwhelming feeling or compulsion to look out my window. And when I did, I saw a massive black dog standing at the road, directly under the seemingly only streetlight that was working. As I was staring at this dog, it turned its head towards me, and I saw it had red eyes. It stared directly back at me for what felt like forever, before turning to face ahead again. And then the streetlight flickered and went out, and I could no longer see the glow of his eyes. No more than a minute later, the street light turned, and in place of the dog was now a very tall man around 7 feet tall, all features completely obscured by darkness, aside from one thing. red eyes that looked directly at me for ages before he walked away. As he walked down the road though, he gradually hunched over more and more until he turned back into the large dog. I've told this story exactly the same for years and years to anyone that listens, but I can't find any information as to what this could be. This was over 10 years ago, and I still remember it quite vividly. I had just gotten out of an emotionally abusive relationship and was dealing with some pretty heavy depression, a level of which I had never experienced before and was quite hard to crawl out of. The situation back at home wasn't any better, so as a small escape, I would go out for late night walks with my sister. We never wandered too far, the cops never stopped us or asked us what we were doing at 2 and 3 in the morning. It was weird, but we felt safe enough. One evening, we made our way to the local 7-Eleven just a few blocks away. To get to this place, we had to cross a short bridge over an irrigation canal. This canal is known for having bats roosting underneath, and we would see them occasionally fly out to catch insects. We're just chatting about various things. My sister and I make our way to the 7-Eleven to get our drink. Neither of us had a lot of money, so when we were out, we would get the largest drink offered and share it between ourselves. On the walk back home, we were approaching the bridge once more, and I look up and see the shadowed form of a dog. It was huge, much larger than a German Shepherd or Siberian Husky would be. It was moving towards us. The odd thing was, there were no sounds of footfalls or the telltale signs of claws upon cement. I've never seen a spirit before, and since it was approaching a street lamp and still had no reflection of its eyes, my sister directed us to the median that partitioned the different lanes of traffic. There were no cars out. We were the only ones on the street that night, and we moved to the median to continue our walk since there were sidewalks on only one side of the road, and that's where the dog was. My sister said to leave it be and to not look at it. It won't bother us. I walked several steps, then looked back anyway. The dog was gone, even as we passed it. If it had sprang into a run, I should have heard the animal's footfalls, but there weren't any. I'm not sure what I saw, but it was a little while before we went out again. I was 12 years old when this happened. I didn't believe in the paranormal or anything until this night. At the time, I was living with my aunt and her kids in Jacksonville, Florida. There was this huge rainstorm going on outside that night, and at 3 a.m. all the power in the building completely went out. I wasn't afraid of the dark, so I slept in the dark. But I was awoken by the sound of my cousin, who was screaming for me and my sister to wake up and come downstairs. Being the kid I was, I didn't understand why he would be screaming for us like he was, and I was 4 to 5 months older than him. I didn't fear anything, but he always acted tough. My cousin was around 6 foot tall and was screaming like a scared child. It would have made sense if me and my sister were scared, because we both lived in a state we didn't know. I slowly started waking up, aggravated by being awoken by someone screaming downstairs. I could slowly hear the front door open, and knew my cousin was standing in the doorway by how close he was to the stairs. Me and my sister share a room, where our room is close to the stairs that leads to the first floor of the apartment. I rolled over from facing the wall to where I would be facing the closet that has sliding doors to access the clothes. I peek out the window to see it's raining so hard, the world looks grey. I hate the sound of thunder, and I fear seeing lightning, but I love the sound of rain. It always has a way of calming me when I was either stressed or waking from a nightmare. I used to have horrible dreams of being attacked by people with no faces, not a blank face without eyes or mouth, but the face is completely black with no eyes, no mouth, no nothing, just emptiness. It was always scary to have the dreams that I'd wake up crying. I stare out the window just thinking of how I wished I wasn't there, and glance towards the dresser with the clock showing 3:05 a.m. when something caught my eye. I glanced towards the closet where I saw a black shadow figure standing in the doorway. It stood as tall as the door, and I noticed it had red glowing eyes. I admit I could have imagined it. I do have mental health issues from abuse sustained by family, and PTSD, psychosis, and borderline personality disorder, as well as hallucinations. So I could just easily conclude that it was all in my head, and the hallucination episode was making me feel uneasy. But then I realized I couldn't be imagining, because when I imagined, it usually only stayed for a second or two. But this thing persisted and was still standing in the doorway. I was just laying in my bed staring at this creature, just thinking why it was here and what did it want. I was frozen in my place by fear. I tried collecting enough courage to ask what did it want, but before I could raise my hand towards its face where a mouth would be. But like I said, the only thing there were its eyes. This creature was telling me not to speak. Could it read minds? Did it know what I was going to ask? But my mind was set. I wanted to know if I was going to die. Before I could ask this creature, it shook its head, and I relaxed. But not long after, it disappeared. I laid in bed thinking, almost on the verge of tears. You could call me weird, but this situation made me sad. I couldn't help but think that Death himself had wanted me, but then probably didn't, because no one wanted me. That's how I felt at the time. I got out of bed after collecting my tears, telling myself who cared, who wanted me or not. I'd prove it to everyone I didn't need them. I wiped my tears, woke up my sister, telling her to come on, and that our cousin was scared. After we leave our room, I look back to see if maybe it was behind us, but the room was empty. When I went downstairs, I asked my cousin if he saw anyone in the house, and to my surprise, he just said he didn't like the dark. We went to a neighbor's until our aunt's mum came back home. About 6 a.m. she comes home to find the apartment empty, and find us at a neighbor's. She didn't want me hanging out with them, because she didn't like me making friends. A week later, I was running down the stairs with my little sister behind me, rushing to the bathroom to take a shower and get ready for school. We did this every day, racing to the bathroom to see whoever made it first would get the shower. Out of nowhere, this huge black dog with red eyes jumped out at me, with its huge scary teeth showing an open maw. I fell backward and landed on my butt, causing my sister to stop laughing and ask what was wrong. I asked her if she saw the dog that jumped on me, and she looked puzzled and surprised. She didn't see the dog. How didn't she see it? It was clearly in front of me, and I felt the dog. I touched its fur when it jumped at me. It felt so real. It scared me thinking she didn't see it. She looked at me as if I were losing my mind. My sister got the shower first. She won the game. It was only fair. I couldn't stop thinking about the dog. When I got to school, I rushed to the library before it started to see what the dog was. The searches I could look at said it was a hellhound, a very scary dog, and nothing that you ever want to encounter, and that people say that they are ancient demons that serve as the heralds of death. According to the legends, seeing one leads to a person's end. Sometimes it's said to be once, other times it requires 3 sightings for the curse to take effect and for the victim to fall. These factors make the hellhound a feared symbol worthy of the name bearer of death. After reading the article of the creature, I feared I was going to meet my end. Seeing the death guy, I told myself I didn't want to die anymore. And then the hellhound. Who knows? All that I know is that I'm afraid of black dogs. I lease a horse at a barn in a very rural part of Ohio. I'm close with the owners of the barn and have a key, so oftentimes I'll go to ride later at night after the lessons are done and I've finished my homework. I had a friend with me who was not a rider. She was just coming to hang out at the barn with me. The way the indoor riding arena is set up, there are large garage doors on each side which I had to open for some airflow. As I was tacking up my horse, I saw something dart across the open barn door and the end of the breezeway. I assumed it was a coyote, and the aisle was lit up, and the outside was dark, so it was hard to tell. I mentioned it to my friend, and we walk into the area from the stalls and just start to warm up since my horse is older and it was chilly. The next half hour goes pretty smoothly. It's as I'm dismounting that I see the similar shape from earlier go fling past on the open garage doors. My horse starts nickering nervously and getting shifty, so I take him back to the aisle to untrack. I tell my friend to go close the barn doors for the night. She says she doesn't want to go alone and is freaked out, so she'll wait for me to go with her. I untack and we close the arena doors. We walk back to the aisle to close the last door, and right outside there's just this massive dog. It was shaggy and came up to about my waist. I'm 5'9". Its eyes weren't glowing, but they were reflecting red in the light from the barn. My friend starts grabbing at me and pulling me back, but the dog isn't moving or anything, just staring at us. I know this sounds weird, but I didn't get a bad vibe from it. I come from a superstitious old-world Italian family, so I'd think I'd have known if it had bad intentions. All of a sudden, it turns around and trots back to the tree line. My friend is freaking out, crying and begging for me to call her dad to come pick her up because she didn't want us leaving by ourselves. It has been a month now and I haven't seen the dog since, but honestly the weirdest part of this story is that the other horses in the barn didn't freak out. If you know anything about horses, you'll know they sense danger and freak out if they think their lives are at risk. This whole situation is just super weird to me. I've had something very bizarre and scary happen the other day. My wife and I were taking our dogs out for a run. Call me weird, but one of the most beautiful spots in our town is the cemetery. We take her there once a week to run around in the area. Don't worry, she doesn't go on graves or anything like that, so everything is going good. We get there and let the dog out and go park in the usual spot. She comes running back very fast and I can tell she seems spooked. Okay, odd, because she always wants to run to every tree and smell it, and normally it's a pain in the ass to get her ready to leave. So we figured we should head out and find a different spot to let her run. On our way out, we see an oddly shaped rock on top of the ridge just outside the cemetery. My wife stopped the car so we could get a better look, but something felt odd. My wife gives out a little whistle to confirm it was nothing, and it lifts its head. She whistles once more, a little louder than the first time, and it turns around and looks at us. This person, or whatever it seemed to be at the moment, just sat there with its head cocked in our direction. The face, no joke, looked like a dog. A big, brown dog with a long snout, yet the dog had arms and looked like it was using a smartphone. This overwhelming sense of fear came over me, and I tell my wife to drive and get out of there fast. I swear on my life, I've seen this with my own eyes. It's crazy the fear you can feel when you see something you simply cannot explain. I plan on going back on my days off and see if I can find some evidence. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's interesting mix. A lot of black dog stories and, I think they were overdue. We had some really interesting things to share. I really enjoyed making this video anyway. And if you guys liked it, be sure to let me know. And who knows, there may be a sequel. As always, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to my incredible patrons for their support. This video was actually selected by the use of a power token by one of our lovely patrons. And if you would like the power to select a video topic of your very own and have it made into a reality, check out the perks I have on Patreon. But for the lowest tier amount, you get your name on the end cards, which is always nice to see your name at the end of an episode. So if you're interested, check it out. If not, that's cool too. In any case, fun stuff coming in the next few days. I'm working on a secret project, which I will tell you about in the coming months. Yes, it's going to take that long to tell you, but it will be worth the wait. And also for any of you, probably maybe like one of you, maybe not even any of you, wondering about the join button on YouTube, I haven't set it up yet. I'm still working on it. I just really want to make sure I nail the rewards that I can offer. Alright, well, I'll leave that as food for thought. In any case, thank you everyone for watching, but for now, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.